Hello and welcome to the cultural session, Women Writing Syria, Resilience, Solidarity and Movement. I'm so sorry for the delay. We've had quite a lot of technical issues and the reason for that is because the women have been connecting from across the world. We had people coming in from the US, from Paris, from UK, from Turkey, from Syria and beyond. And of course, as a result of that, we have had technical issues, but we're all here, we're all ready, we're all good to go. And of course, this means our session may go on for a little bit longer. Big apologies, but we can begin now. So I'd like to welcome you. My name is, of course, Badia Kamal. I will be chairing this session today. I'm a lecturer in post-colonial and partition studies, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of Cara, the Council for At-Risk Academics. This cultural session is a part of a 5-day online symposium called Voices from Syrian Academic Community. Earlier today, we launched our first amazing sessions on societal change and gender by fantastic speakers, Syrian academics. And what we engaged with was thinking about the ways in which, scholarly ways in which, the women of Syria are not weak victims. The women of Syria are resilient, was a core topic. They have a presence, they speak loudly, they take action with concrete, impactful roles throughout the revolution and war is a lot of the discussion that was going on earlier today. And I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be sharing a platform with seven amazing, resilient women today. So this event has been co-created together with the amazing Dr. Rida Anis from Hassan Kalyoncu University. She was an associate professor at Aleppo, now she is in Turkey, along with Maggie Grant, and has been inspired by the amazing research by Rida, Fozya, and Hiba, who will be speaking here today. This evening, you will experience an extravaganza of readings, performances, and discussion by pioneering Syrian women authors and poet activists. And together we'll discuss a range of ideas related to their lived experiences of displacement, ideas of family, social movement, mental health, and various other topics. The structure of the event will be as follows. We will initiate with the amazing Samir Yazbek, who will read from her new book, Planet of Clay. I will have a brief discussion with her about that. Then we will move on to a lineup of amazing speakers, each of which I will introduce as we go along. Hiba, Fatima, Jihan, Fozya, Ibtisam, and ending with Amal. Then we'll have a roundtable discussion and open the stage for questions and answers. So please do put your questions, any questions that you may have into the chat box, and Maggie Grant is monitoring the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So let's begin. I'd like to begin by introducing the force they call Samir Yazbek, an award-winning writer, novelist, journalist, and activist, and a force that has inspired all of us women across the world. Samir was born in Jable in 1970 and studied literature before beginning her career as a journalist and scriptwriter for Syrian television and film. Her novels, she has a lineup of fantastic novels, includes Cinnamon, published in 2012, Planet of Clay, that we're going to be engaging with today. And she also has accounts of the Syrian conflict and revolution and war in her books, The Crossing, My Journey to the Shattered Heart of Syria, as well as a woman in a crossfire. Yazbek's work has been translated into multiple languages and is recognized with numerous awards, notably the French Best Foreign Book Award, the PEN Oxfam Novim, and the PEN Pinter Awards as well. She's also the founder of the Women Now for Development. So over to you, Samir.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read the first page of my novel known as The Planet of Clay. It is published by Al Adab Publishing House in Beirut. I'm going to read only the first page so the readers can go through it in English. I will start. I don't know if you care how the paper feels, or whether you are like me and run your fingers over its surface. And it is no use adding anything else about my fingers and how I trace them over the lines my hands have written. I'm thinking something now, and it is that if every sheet of paper piled up in these cardboard boxes were laid out flat, they could make a paper airplane the size of the plane circling over my head. But don't think that my worries might mean much to anyone but me. Everything I'm writing to you could vanish, and it will be a strange fluke if you have the chance to read it, like the fluke that made me so different from other people. I was born, and I can't stop walking. I stand up and I set off and I keep walking and walking. I see the road and it has no end. My feet take over and I walk. I just follow them. I don't understand why it happened, and I'm not expecting you to understand either. This enchantment of mine doesn't care what people might understand.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Samir. That was such
شكرا جزيلا لك سمر. هذا مقطع
read. Just a few questions regarding this. And of course, we can open up, like I said, please do post your questions in the chat box. And at the end, we'll discuss a little more. This was published originally in 2016-17, I believe, Samir, under the title Blue Pen. And I was just wondering if you could share with us how the idea about this young girl who's constantly walking came to you, when you started writing it in 2000. When did you start writing it? It's recently been translated, and we have a copy of it, all of us in English. But can you tell us about the Arabic and the process there?
There is a lot of noise. I cannot hear. I think I will answer, but there is a lot of noise.
طيب لدينا الكثير من
I
الضجيج.
think we have to put it mute. So, yes. فكرة الرواية الحقيقة كانت آخر رواية أصدرتها أنا قبل
Then the idea of the last novel I wrote was before the revolution in 2010. As the popular uprising started since the beginning of 2011, I started or stopped writing the novels for the benefit of documentation. I wrote a lot about violence perpetrated by the regime against the protesters, and I documented the first 4 months of the revolution, how it started peaceful and how it turned into a fully fledged war. the war that was Women in the Crossfire was the first book, and the second documenting or documentation book was when I decided to go back to Syria, to the north of Syria, to establish women now for development and to write in newspapers in the Arab world as well as in the West to speak about what was happening in Syria, because there was a lot of manipulation made by the Syrian regime to falsify a lot of facts. So I spent 5 years documenting massacres, wars, and on the front lines. This novel was a kind of the return to the country, because for me, not writing a novel was a kind of alienation. At the time, I was with a friend, and we were following the news of the chemical massacre in August 2013. My friend was the kidnapped lawyer Razan Zaytouna, and we were talking together every day. At the time, I decided to go back to writing novels as a form of turning back to myself, because I was alienated from my own self as a novelist. Because basically, I published about 10 books before the revolution. So that point was a kind of turning back to my homeland, returning to Syria. We lost the speaker.
We've just, okay. Hopefully she'll come back, but I think that was fantastic in terms of giving us the overview of Samir Yazbek in terms of this recent novel and her shifts between life writing and so fiction and non-fiction, and that period of her narratives have inspired us greatly, all of us here today. And now I'd like to move on and introduce Hiba Ezzideen, who is an academic, a scholar, who has written on Samir Yazbek. Earlier, she presented a fantastic session on Samir Yazbek. And she's also, of course, a creative writer. And she's going to read from her novel, forthcoming novel that hasn't been published yet, but will be out soon. Just to introduce Hiba Alhaj, she's a Syrian feminist, academic, grassroots activist, and novelist. She lives in Exile in Turkey. She is studying for a PhD at the moment. She also holds a master's degree in English literature from Aleppo University, and she has a master's in business. So she brings together two disciplinary worlds, which is fantastic, and contributes to many of her feminist initiatives, such as the Syrian Revolution Feminist, Equity and Empowerment Organization. At the same time, she also works as a civil society strengthening specialist with UNDP. She's written many articles since 2012. And like I said, she's completed her debut novel that we're so excited to hear about now. So over to you, Hiba.
Thanks so much, Bahriya. شكرا جزيلا. بالحقيقة مثل ما تفضلت.
Thank you so much. As Bahriya said, I will read one of Women of Behalf, and it speaks about the story of 5 women who drowned. And although the revolution brought women back to the open space and gave some justice to women, but there was more focus on some women, and others became bystanders only. That's why the Women of Behalf is a narrative of the women who drowned, who died. For me, it is my first work to send 2 messages: the duty of other women towards those women who perished, and that all those who died are not mere numbers. They have lives and they have stories.
راح اختار مقتطفات من
I'm going to choose excerpts from the novel. The novel combines my story with those who drowned because one day I migrated by the sea and I was prone to drown as well. So I say we got onto the boat and set off towards the Greek island of Mytilene. After about an hour, the fuel ran out and we were stranded at sea for many hours. One of the people who of the smugglers tried to use his pistol and not to get on the boat. So after 1 hour, the fuel ran out and we were stranded at sea for many hours. None of the ships or vessels that crossed our path helped us, even though the boat sank and we were scattered. I managed to make it here. Thank God for your safety. What counts is that you got here in one piece, not missing a hand or a leg, or having a whole body has become a luxury for Syrians who dies in one piece these days. Khalaf said as she kissed her hand and brought it up to her forehead. Now I move to another part. Behath was big. This reached the ears of another skeleton. It seems that travel was an issue for her, except Naima grabbed her and winked at her to let it go. Behath was big enough for everyone's customs, cooking techniques, clothes, and language. We tore each other apart outside of Behath, she said, criticizing the other's culinary skills, forgetting that tests is subjective. Thank God we've reached here to the land of freedom. Turtle, cumin, safflower, saffron, burnt flavored yogurt, and cured. Didn't you die asking for freedom? I was also busy buying vegetables from the Monday Bazaar in the Emirk and Gaziantep areas, and I heard many women asking for charvel. From their accent, they seemed like Syrians. I remember the Facebook war on the matter. I really felt insulted when someone wrote jokingly defending his love for charvel whilst criticizing my love for burnt flavored yogurt, which the people of Idlib had and Homs are famous for. There was a Bedouin who would carry the milk to Damascus, who then found that they boiled their milk, and as if it were an achievement, he went back to his family in Idlib and Homs and imitated what he had seen. So he burned the milk and thought that was the real taste of how it should be. How can we say we are moving to a more advanced society when we are still enslaved by classism and regionalism? All the residents of Idlib and Homs were stigmatized as Bedouins. Bedouins were insulted by the suggestion that they don't know how to boil milk or are uncivilized, and the civilization is only for Damascus. That is a few rank higher than everyone else. All the pain and fighting over charcoal and burnt milk. While the skeletons gathered the grass, the song Hayat Yabu Zuluf rang throughout Bihath, as if it had become a bazaar in Sarmada. On summer evenings, people got used to leaving the loudspeaker in the square because they couldn't bear the trouble each night of setting it up for the seemingly endless weddings. Women gathered round the sound, each of them starting to chant their favorite song, until the rest of the Bihath residents thought that the women had gone mad and that Bihath had become a madhouse. When they finished singing, they fell on top of one another. Their bones couldn't bear that burden of joy or laughter. Silence fell, and one of them asked, "Are the dead really singing? Are we dead? I no longer know if I am alive or dead, but I must be dead. And you all too, because for such a long time I haven't seen my mother, my brothers, or my neighbors. Like this depth is a different world from the one we lived in before we came here. We're at the rocky bottom of a sea whose name we don't know. We are just bones, looking odd, but we're still able to talk and live. Is being alive different from living? Yes, because we live only once. But we are alive many times in the memory of those who love us, those haunted by our stories and our voices. All of our lives are brought to a place like this, like Bihath, who even gave it this name. The skeletons muttered and whispered about the name, the place, and whether they were simply alive or actually living. Sumaya said, when I came here, one of the bones told me That Bihath goes back to 2015 when the wave of illegal immigration to Europe started. Many women, men, and children drowned. One of those who drowned left a message on a rock near here, near the atolls. I write to say to everyone who passes here that we had a dream once, a house, friends, a rose garden in our spacious house. But the Syrian regime bombed the house and destroyed it. The flowers died, and so did the friends. We heard through opposing TV station that the friends of the Syrian people would stand with us during our trial. They brought us death on inflatable boats and opened up all of their oceans for us to voluntarily drown in with all our freedom. You will not know at first glance, like me, whether they are alive, dead, or dead. We got used to washing the dead with sand and then burying them in the ground. But you will realize after the last gasp that your chest take that there is boundary between the two worlds, between life and resurrection. So you're in Bihath. After dying from torture, they must have thrown my body in the Yarmouk River, because when I was arrested, I heard from the rest of the detainees that they were getting rid of bodies because there wasn't enough space in the morning. Khalaf cut her off. As for Naim, she remembered that she had been going down to the Quake River to touch her son's face when it was suddenly caught up by the water. She yelled, but no one answered. Then the current swept her away. For hours, she was up and then under until she suffocated and was dragged to the bottom until she reached Bihar. I slipped near Barada River and fell and hit my head on the edge, then passed out. The water pulled me here, Iman said. The skeleton then looked at Hamdo. Maybe she had talked about how she got to Bihath, but she wasn't sure what had happened. All she knew is that she had saved Hamdo. When a fighter shot at him in the hospital, she shielded him using her chest, so the bullet got lodged in her heart, but she doesn't remember what happened after. Maybe the bodies were collected in a hurry and stacked in a pickup awaiting burial, and she rolled off into the Al Khabur River or Al Balkh. Al Balkh. Sumayya's voice rose. It seems like I am the only one who came here with a regular death. I drowned while migrating to Europe. This is only an excerpt of the novel, and hopefully it will be published soon. And I hope that you liked what you have heard.
We loved what we just heard, Hiba. Thank you so much. Of course, we'll carry on with discussions and questions. If you can put your questions into the chat box. Hiba has just given us a taste of a otherworldly experience when it comes to thinking about the case of displacement, what's come to be called the refugee crises, and of course thinking of it within a women's framework as well. But like I said, we'll talk about this at the end. Please put your questions in the chat box. And now I'd like to introduce the wonderful Dr. Fatima Nawal Bazerbashi, who is a teacher to all of us. She is a professor at Aleppo University and has taught and lectured many of us who are at this platform today. The wonderful Fatima was born in Aleppo and has lived, worked, and studied in Egypt, Greece, Switzerland, and England. She was a lecturer in English Literature Department at the University of Aleppo from 1978 to 2001. She worked as translator for 4 years with Dr. Mahmoud Hussein, an Islamic preacher, where she completed a range of texts related to legal and religious expressions, including the supporting dictionary, an Arabic English dictionary. She's written numerous short story collections related to the Syrian struggle and crises, which include Life Phantom and Where is the Right Way, 1, 2, 3, and various other collections, including the Dispersed Pearls, selected expressions from benefits of the holy names of Allah in the Holy Quran, and Jokes and Wisdom. And she also is very musical and she plays the lute. So Fatima is going to be reading from Overactivity. Over to you, Fatima.
تفضلي سيدي فاطمة.
اوكي السلام عليكم.
Hello everyone.
يزور القارئ في كتبي.
Those who read my books
هل تسمعوني جيدا؟
she's asking if you can hear her.
أسمعك. اوكي. يزور القارئ في كتبي عوالم شتى. البرزخ، الجحيم، القرون.
Those who are reading my books will understand that I have several themes that I write about, including psychiatry and therapy in order to overcome all psychological disorders, and all that I write about leads to knowing God for those who would like to know God. In my artistic work, I provide various type of contents, but all revolve around the love of God. I named 3 of my books where the road leads to, because I believe all roads start with love and end with love. And those who love God can find God. I use realistic work combined with expressionism, and also I present my stories in order to involve the reader. That's why I use dialogue in order to present my story as if it's a play presented in front of the reader. The story that I'll tell, it's about the soul. The soul is always divided between what's good and what is bad. And it's only with the help of God that we can choose the right way. Hassan grew up in an environment far away from an rich environment. He met a beautiful woman and he fell in love with her, and when she rejected him, he decided to abduct her using force, and it worked. This is part of the conversation that took place after they abducted the woman. Hassan looked at Malak. However, he looked at her as if he's watching a movie. It was really challenging. Hassan said, now I own you. She continued looking at him, but she did not answer. So he pulled her to him and he said, who do you think you are? You have to be begging me for mercy. She said, you don't really know who's the exact victim, you or me. He said, how can you talk to me like this? She said, do you really think that you've managed to bring me here because you've decided to do so? Then you are crazy. He said, you think you are a logical person, a rational person, but I own you. She said, no, you did not abduct me. She remained calm. She said, poor you, how did you manage to do so? You are accusing me of being irrational. You definitely you have a brain, but it seems that you've never used it before. Here Hassan lost his temper and he slapped her, so she started bleeding. Here she started praying to God and she said, "Oh God, you you control my destiny. I know that love is very strong, and when Hassan fell in love with her, he was moved when she started bleeding. He was puzzled himself, and after he started to calm down, and Malak was still very strong, looking at him with the same look. Hassan said, pretending to be hot and to be harsh, but his eyes revealed otherwise. He said, "I'm the one who brought you here, and this is only me. Who are you to judge me? I use my brain and I decide what I want to do." And he said,
So Malak prayed to God, said, "Oh Lord, I believe that your destiny will be implemented." And then she said to Hassan, "Please let me pray two rak'ah for God, because I need to recharge my soul by God to help me." So Hassan calmed down after he felt that he is honored, and he said, "I will allow you after you admitted that you are my slave and I am your Lord." She said, "We both are the slaves of God, and your control here is fake, and the real control is there because it is eternal." He said mockingly, "I don't want to hear this silly words here and there and hereafter and thereafter." And they said, "I think and I believe that you will never be feel comfortable. Anything there is nothing more comforting than the money that I have, and the best victory is my control over you." She said, "You are poor soul. Didn't I told you that you have never used your mind? I am sure that you haven't used it a single time in your life." He said, "Do you believe that you are educated and you talk about me? You talk to me about charging as if I am a battery of a mobile phone? Do you mock me for your educational level? What controls this word is the force, not knowledge. When I have the force, I own knowledge and the mind and the entire world, and everything will be enslaved to me as you are enslaved to me now." She said, "Power is for God the Almighty. He gives it to whoever he wants, and he removes it from whomever he wants." He said, "Wait, isn't God able to paralyze you immediately or to send you a disease that you will never heal from? Where is your power? But when you control the body, this is meaningless because our bodies will die and vanish at the end of the day. But you can never control the hearts or the spirit because they work under the orders of God, and no one can select them but their creators. You haven't created my soul or my heart, and you think that you control this earth." Hassan started to feel confused and he didn't know what to say. He said, "You think that you are a philosopher? Explain to me the meaning of comfort that you are telling me about or talking to me about." She said, "Have you ever prayed to God to learn about this comfort?" He said, ashamed, "I have never prayed and no one taught me how to pray." She said, "The spiritual charging is the one that gives you comfort. Why don't you constrain your soul? Your soul will never be constrained, as it will go from your body to the eternal world." You came from nothing and then to this earth, and then you will move to the life between the earthly life and the hereafter, and then you will either go to heaven or to the fire hell. You are handsome, but it means nothing. You have to look into your spirit. You need to recharge your soul. I want to make you look what is beyond your feet. Look up to the sky, and you will see with the eye of your heart the creator of these worlds, and you will find the comfort without knowing that. Yes, you control everything, but I want you to answer me openly. Are you happy despite everything that you have? Hassan was ashamed and confused. He said, the more I achieve something of my wishes, I feel bored and I look for something else. He said, God seeks his slaves who pray for him, and he can grant them all the strength to be the strength in their ears, in their eyes, and in their feeling. I believe that your name is Malak. It is taken from being an angel. You are angelic. So allow me to get married to you. She said, no, don't worry. When you are with your God, so you will be you will be glad. He said, do you know why I liked your looks? In the beginning, she said, no. He said, because I felt that you are resilient. And he said, how can I uh, how will I repent? And will God the Almighty accept my repentance? And he started saying, oh God, forgive my sins. She said, don't worry, my brother. God loves those who repent and gets back to the righteous track. After that, they called on Hassan to the police outside called on Hassan to surrender and get out. So she went with him outside, and she held his hand, but one of the police officer thought that he was taking her as a human shield, so he shot at them and he shot both of them. Their spirits flew in the skies of the Lord's. Their earthly bodies died, but their eternal souls went to a better place. Hassan said to Malak, I am very happy with you, my love. I was dead, and you made me alive. Thank God that you came in my way in order to learn about this happiness.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fatima. That was absolutely amazing. And again, thinking about the other worldly experience that kind of spoke to Hiba's earlier piece, but this time thinking of the spiritual and religious connections, which we can unpack further, and particularly thinking about the ways in which all women are meleks, angels. Thank you so much, Fatima. And we will move on to the next speaker, but of course, please put your questions into the chat box, and at the end of the session, we will open the platform for you guys to ask your questions to these amazing, resilient women. So let's move on now to our next speaker, amazing speaker of the evening, Jihan Sayed-Issa. The wonderful Jihan is Syrian. She is now living in Gaziantep. She has also inspired many of us. Many of the team working at Cara are writing about Jihan's work as well. She's an award-winning poet, short story writer, essayist, and critic. She has several short story collections, including The People Want. Her short story, entitled The Dead Mammoth, was made into a film at Harvard University and screened at a host of renowned, well-known international festivals, and it won the Best Screenplay Award at the Onioto Film Festival. She's also the Boston Writer Room Essay winner. Jihan has published alongside a range of creative works. She's also published critical works on feminist literature in the Syrian Revolution at the Jordan Research Center. She has presented and supported numerous cultural events and festivals across the world, including at the Foundation for a Cultural Library for Syrians in Gaziantep. She has served as a jury member in many competitions, including the Palestine House of Poetry. She's translated numerous short stories from Arabic to Turkish and has published in numerous Turkish newspapers. Hoş geldin, Jihan Sayed-Issa, and I'll hand you over now to Jihan, who's going to read a prose piece. Over to you, Jihan.
مرحبا. Hi everyone. Good evening. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Hello everyone, peace be upon you.
تلك الكتب بعيدا في الجب. كانت أول عبارة سمعتها عن الكتب في حياتي.
Put these books away. This was the first thing that I heard when I was 6 years old. My father, who was a doctor, he was taken to prison of Palmyra. The word of freedom that I mentioned once, and my colleague, my teacher, heard me talk about it. When I was 8 years old. Any punishment I received later for the marches of the president, and I didn't want to chant because I refused to chant or say things that I disbelieve in. All of these emotions shaped me and shaped my relation with the revolution and with literature alike. The revolution of 2011 hasn't been the first juncture in time for me. Before that, I was a volcano of emotions that should always be kept unpacked. So any expression of the emotions means that I will be prosecuted. I was forced to be silent. I was afraid of the Palmyra prison, the Syrian pastel that I passed through its walls several times when I was young to visit in hopeless attempts to visit my father until this dream was achieved when I became a young girl, and this visit was as if we are going into the fire hell. Then the revolution stirred my emotions and it gave wings to my words. It broke all the walls and opened all the horizons for me to carry the tears of the children and the oppression of women and the pain of men. I carried this message and flied in the world to reach the world until one of my stories that it was the people want reached one of the lecturers of direction in Harvard University, and he turned it into a movie that was screened in on international areas. So, and it was screened in all corners of Earth, and it got the best scenario of a movie. In all of my stories, I tried to express the Syrian pain. This pain is already extensive. It doesn't need more work in that. I didn't exaggerate and I didn't imagine, because the reality was worse than any imagination. In the story, I am the narrator and I am the heroine, and in reality, I'm the one that is suffering. I selected my heroes to be women because women are the best to tell details of the stories. The story says, and this is the story of the dead cannot die. In one of the death tracks in my cities, as I was going back home after after a hard day, I was going through one of the roads that we were going every day. We were laughing and mocking death. Then we were crying, then laughing again. We felt estranged and alienated after you. Then we go to lunch. Long ago, I didn't hear any one of them asking for food since they perished. I don't remember that I called them for food. I thought, what can I make for them? I remembered the Kuba and the Mlukhia and the Yabrak and those young people who died under torture in prisons and they haven't tasted the cooking that they smelled its smell. So I decided that I will not forget tabula because some of the invitees are women and women love tabula. And I didn't forget Kamal because Kamal, as I was told, he died in prison out of thirst. So water will be on top of the things on the table, and most importantly, I will have a lot of baby milk bottles because there are a lot of babies who didn't have milk, and maybe some of the mothers don't have any milk left in their breasts because of the blood that's spilled. So I prepared the food and I got in with my car into the graveyard. I got into the graveyard. The graves were built one up on top of the other because of the crowdedness. I didn't imagine that the majority of my city are here now. I called for them and nobody came but Hassan. Hassan was buried in Rush, so part of his left hand was over the above the ground. I uh, I called on him and he started to chant freedom, freedom. And suddenly everyone came out and they started to say, Syria wants a freedom. And everyone was chanting and singing. I called him to foods and some of them, and they all ran to eat. Some of them were without feet, some of them without legs, some of them even without a head. The heads went to the bodies that were deprived of heads. And within 15 minutes, all of these bodies were complete bodies, but in a caricature style. We laughed and we don't know how they were buried and how they died. Uh, those who have a grave are very lucky. They told me about their neighbors, how they were killed at the checkpoints, about and how some of them wanted to across to the other side of life. They were bombed by a rocket. There were a lot of stories that I will tell these stories one day. They laughed and cried and they don't care about death anymore and it doesn't mean anything to them. But for me, I still hold that fear in my heart. One child apologized from his mother and came to me. He apologized to his mother because he couldn't clean he couldn't clean the blood on his face, and I apologized from him because I didn't bring with me any candies or biscuits. There was a sound of an airplane in the skies, and I was afraid. They laughed at me, so I waved to them and went back to the car. And when I came to my car, I saw that they were still dreaming, talking, and laughing. After 2 hours, as I was driving or navigating in the narrow neighborhoods, fleeing from the airplane, uh, then I came to my home and light on my bed. In the morning, I found a lot of kubba, mlokhia, and yabrak, and a lot of milk, baby milk, and I don't know where that come from. Maybe they were here or they were there. By the way, Hassan in that story is my cousin. He is a handsome man. He was a pharmacist and he was killed by Bashar al-Assad. Before that, Hafiz al-Assad killed his father, who was a pharmacist as well, in the infamous Hama massacre. I said that the revolution liberated me and liberated my pen. So I wrote stories, shorter stories, and poetries, as well as critical books, as well as research. I also wrote prose in the Syrian Revolution, and I wrote a book that hasn't been established yet, hasn't been published yet, and it will be my dissertation for the PhD. Thank you very much, and I believe that art is the best language that can bring the different nations together. I still have the responsibility to represent the women of my country and to speak loud, because the pain that is on my wings needs to be shown to the world. Maybe as women, we're under painful time, but we can break the walls of silence. Thank you very much, and I hope that what you heard means something to you. Thank you.
It means so much to us, Jihan. Thank you so much for bringing together the personal, your lived experiences, and also that shift between the fiction and non-fiction. And of course, again, we have the audience definitely has lots of questions for you. Please do pop them in the chat box. And I too really look forward to us opening the platform to discuss. Thank you so much for sharing your narrative. And now we'll move on to our next speaker, Fozya Aldared, who is a part of Cara. We have been working together with Fozya on various scholarly projects. She's an academic, she's also a journalist, and of course today we'll be hearing from her as a novelist and prose writer. She studied Arabic language and literature at the University of Aleppo, Syria. She's written articles, novels, short stories, and she's worked on a host of projects which focus on Syrian women and war as related to cultural and social injustice, families, displacement and suffering, as well as education, honor issues and agricultural societies. She's worked as a journalist for Geron Media Network, and she's worked on a range of oral projects, oral history projects called, one of them as example is called Syrian Women Lives Before and After the War. Her debut novel is entitled The Son of Brutality, published in 2019, and her short story collection, Surrealists, Mothers of Exile, is forthcoming with Fadad in Jordan. And she's currently writing a new novel about social transformation of women in the 20th and 21st century with focus on rituals, aesthetics, and heritage. She's also writing a scholarly text on the image of Syrian women in literature at Mardin Arteglo University. Over to you, Fozya.
Thank you very much, Bahriya. Good evening. My name is Fozya Aldared, but I publish under a pen name because when I started writing when I was in Syria under regime held areas. So my name was Fawz Al Faris. That was my pen name. 3 years ago, I came out, and now I am a master's student in Techno University in Mardin, and my dissertation's name is the image of Syrian women in the writers in exile between 2011 and 2020. As for the group of stories is the running photo that I'm going to read an excerpt to you from it. It is one of the stories from the new short stories that will be published in the new year. It is the title of that book is Mothers of Exile. It will be published by Fada'at or Spaces Publishing House in Jordan. The idea of this group of stories or book of stories, the idea came in a very difficult point in time of my life here in Turkey. When I came here, the conditions were very difficult for me because I was a mother with children coming to a strange country. I know no one, I don't know what to do and how to afford. The house that I lived in the beginning was a basement, very small, very cold and wet. It was only 2 rooms and 1 kitchen, and the kitchen was my only place that I could write, work, and study in. The idea of this story came from a mouse that I saw in the kitchen, and you may know that as women we feel afraid of or we feel gross when we see cockroach or these mouses or rats. So I thought at that point that I need to confront that problem. I need to clean the place to go back to studying and writing in that place. I managed to get rid of this rodent, not by any traps or anything, but I confronted it. And I believe that at that point, I managed to face my fear and get rid of it. So that was the spark that from which came this story that I'm going to read to you now. Um, there is another point. I have a teacher from Mary Queen University. She is my friend, and we always talk about the conditions of creativity where women, under which women read. And I told her about the condition of this story. So she suggested to me an article about the novel by Virginia Woolf, which is a room for one person. And I wrote the article, then I brought the story to read, and it speaks about a place for women to write and to get a stable income. That's what I didn't have at the time. And also, when I was writing this book of stories, I achieved a very difficult work, which provided me with some financial security. But when I moved to another house, and in the new house, I couldn't resume writing. Maybe I missed the kitchen that I was writing in. So that movement and that transformation was changed for me. And I also wrote an article that I like. It's called The Kitchens of Inspiration. And if I want to have a title for my books of stories, maybe I will write The Mouses of Inspiration. Before I start reading my story, which is under the title The Runaway Photo, that the circumstances of pain and crackdown that we are living under as women are very difficult, but we can only overcome them by resolve and strength. Although now with reading, I can feel that I am able to live again after the war destroyed a world that I was part of, or I thought that I was part of. So the story is under the title The Runaway Photo. Whenever I see her, I tremble. I run to some place far away, where I don't expect her, or waves of nausea that have been washing over me for so many days. I can't look at her for too long while she passes nimbly before me. That's the one good thing about her. Maybe she realizes how much I dislike her, and so is careful not to be in my eyeline for long periods of time. But at the same time, she keeps popping up in my world without warning. She passes by now and then, reminding me of her long-standing presence in my house, my life, whether I like it or not, and how I can't break free of the nightmare that she is, no matter how hard I try. I'm always looking for a way to be free of her. In secret, I set different traps for her, but I'm yet to succeed, which is why I'm thinking of confrontation as the final solution. I won't hesitate to kill her if necessary. I can't stand seeing her disrupting the peace in my life whenever she pleases. I hate how I'm always thinking about her in different ways, how she takes over my time, my thoughts, my sleep even, where I believe that she is right next to me in the tight space that we share. I prefer such a space to the wide road outside, where the breath of people who have been crowded together for a while unsettles me. During the pandemic, this fear of others' breath grew, proving to me that I was right all along in my fear of others breathing on and around me. Time passes, and a small possible opening appears in the wall of life that is closing in on us day after day. Others are no longer hell, but rather our own breath. Of course, I have many reasons to hate her and consider murdering her. It starts with how ugly she is. It makes me sick. When I lean into such feelings and make up my mind, I'm confronted by my perception of her, which makes me double back on how I was feeling previously. She's cunning, a master of deception and manipulation, and this is what makes me admire her, despite my best efforts. I then ask myself, is this pitiful girl worth me wasting my time with all these ups and downs? Why does it matter how I feel about someone who naturally rises against the traps set for her, while she sidesteps them with all ease and comfort? I am perplexed, trying to figure out how I feel about her once and for all. I think of her spewing insolent, exasperating words at me. What an idiot you are! You think you can get rid of me that easily? Intent on poisoning my mind further, she revealed to me flippantly that I'm like her, that we have a lot in common. It starts with the appearance and ends with our souls and the disposition that we both have. She has the audacity to point this all out. Maybe she is assured of her long standing presence in my world and now wants to take it one step further by saying all this. I love letting you know how alike we are, especially because you hate how I act so much. But when you give it to me, you give it some thought, you will see that you act just like me. Of course, you hate what I'm saying, but you're not strong enough to face that truth. Who do you think you are, black woman, putting my behavior on trial? Go to hell. Go back to the dirty hole that you crawled out of. I'm free to do as I please. I swear that I'll kill you the first chance that I get. The idea of us looking alike scares me. I rush to the small pocket mirror I carry in my bag to see for myself as I get ready to make my way to the office where I booked a ticket to Ankara. I was summoned by the UNHCR office over there for them to verify some of the information with which I'm requesting asylum in a European country. Life has become too difficult here. I check myself and make sure my modesty is covered, as I always do. For certain, I won't take off my black abaya to run away from how our bodies look so much alike, at least the last time I caught a glimpse of them. I'm from a conservative family where the women are always hidden backstage, and if something urgent happened to force a woman out into the open world, she would be there behind a veil. I have never, not even for a day, ever thought of removing the veil that I put between me and the world around me. Actually, the issue of clothes hasn't ever been an obsession for me. I can do what I want and mess around as I please after having been plucked out of my social, geographical, and historical milieu and become a number that is classified quietly and systematically in the register of those seeking temporary protection in this country. Here, we're just a bunch of papers and photos stamped by officialdom. I just like how this black robe that I'm wrapped in from head to toe means that others see me as a respectable woman, no tongues daring to wag. Only my neighbor who owns a shop in the souk or in the bazaar sees something different in me. His eyes are full of lust, like whips under my black abaya, as if stripping me bare. When he becomes aware that I'm not sheltering myself from his looks or being silent out of modesty as he would expect it from someone dressed like me, he goes even further. He isn't satisfied with the looks that he throws my way every time I come to him, pretending to have to buy one thing or the other. He tries to piece together in his broken Arabic what comes out rudely as an invitation to his house. I quite enjoy setting traps. And when the target is about to be entangled in my net, I move away, satisfied with having seen physical and emotional states that the prey experienced as they made their way to my tempting trap. Although this scene has repeated itself to an unpleasant degree in my life, I'm not concerned about new experiences or getting out of this pattern. You go round in small circles, and your thoughts confirm to you that this small circle is a reflection of the entire world. Last month, I removed the three women from my life with great ease. I swatted them away like you would a pesky fly from your cheek. Stupid women who thought their existence in my life was necessary and that I couldn't do without them. I let them stay in their delusional orbit, going round and round for a whole year. I never wasted an opportunity to strengthen this delusion of theirs, making it seem realistic. Some of them may have thought that I had suddenly strayed, or that it was the harsh circumstances of the war or buried motives from my childhood that made life as inappropriate as it is, especially as I haven't been hiding myself lately. This attitude spread in my life just like the pandemic. I don't have the slightest desire to take any action to hide it from others' eyes. Fears of infection around you are extinguished. I released the desire to transform it from merely a hunk of flesh concealing my curves with a black abaya to a being who takes up space in the theater of life, occupying a space outside the realm of those minds who see me as nothing more than a tasty piece of flesh to satiate their pot bellies with, and that organ that hangs beneath it. The men I know repeat the same thing, that I am a delicate woman like no other, but I'm actually just pretending to be sentimental, that I only have half a mind for them to fall for me. Even with a quarter of a mind and a dash of beauty, I can make the fiercest and most venerable of men crawl at my feet. The more they grovel, the more I plunge into sadism and cruelty, delighting in torturing them. My imagination runs wild that fate has chosen me to restore respect to every woman who has tasted betrayal at the hands of some men. These thoughts exploded into my head after that vulgar black woman tossed out the idea of us looking alike. I shouldn't be bothered by her maneuvering and her calm, disciplined avoidance of my traps. That is exactly the way I act when I lure someone into my trap so he falls into it alone while I move on to someone else without missing a beat. My life has a rhythm which I have set to a particular melody that I never think of abandoning for another, one I have set since the very first moment I set foot on the land of this country. A week ago, from what I can remember, at 10 tonight, I had prepared my first cup of coffee to sip leisurely alongside my first calming cigarette after the children had gone to bed. It was unlike the five other cigarettes that I had hastily smoked during the day without the slightest enjoyment. When that filthy slut appeared the last time in my house doing her usual thing, ruining any enjoyment of mine, I didn't feel nervous like every other time I had seen her. My calmness seeped from me to her as she stood mocking me. Don't you see how alike we are? Even in the little pleasure that you carry out in secret, never daring to declare them openly. You're like me, thinking you're free while you're rotting away in the cellar. I smiled at her and took a picture of her with my phone to document the final moment of her life, especially that mocking smile. I decided to save that photo at it, to look at if I go through with it, and my conscience pricks me someday after murdering her. I was certain that day that I would succeed in killing her. I'd traced her steps and set different traps that she couldn't avoid, no matter how she tried. I stared at her just a few meters away. I finished my coffee and my cigarette while I waited for her to lower her gaze and move on. Maybe then I would forgive her insolence and go back on my decision to kill her. But she insisted on staying in my eyeline for as long as possible. So there was no way around it. I had to kill her and get her out of my mind, which enjoyed nibbling on the thought of her as if she was a handful of fresh, tasty grains. My head was full of noisy thoughts starting to organize themselves into one. One thought acknowledging how alike we were. I finished up my interview with the Commissioner for Refugees. They asked me for a photo in addition to a real social media account with disabled privacy settings. While taking the photo, I lifted the veil from my face. They don't know just how conservative my family is, and that by lifting this veil from my face, with the sunlight hitting it, I've become a black dot on the spotless family annals. They will crush me and kick me out of the family, my society, erase my history even. I'll be consigned to the book of a new rebel woman who have spread in their lifetime like the plague. I decided to put the last picture that I took of myself. I'm smiling in it. While this picture was downloading, I was disappearing little by little.
Wow, thank you, Fozya. That was absolutely stunning, and thank you so much for sharing that with us and bringing the idea of thinking about changing spaces, changing time, and how that impacts the writing experience and your narrative as well. And again, there's lots of questions that I have, but also that the audience has that we'll move on to at the end of the session. Thank you so much. So please do pop any of the questions or comments that you have into the chat box. We'll now move on to the wonderful Ibtisam Ibrahim Teresi, award-winning novelist and short story writer. She was born in Jericho, Syria in 1959 and graduated in Arabic language at Aleppo. She has published 14 amazing, groundbreaking novels, including Part 2, Exit to the Syrian Teh, that was published by Dar al-Awan in 2007, and that won the first prize for farm competition. She's also published 24th Street, Beirut, that was published by Bank House in 2017, and Cities of Yamam, published by Arab Book Library in Cairo in 2014. She's got a range of short story collections, two of them. One of them is called Dead Roots, and that won the Suhad al-Sabah Prize. Before the revolution, she also authored 3 collections of short stories and 6 novels. Since the revolution and after being forcibly displaced because of the arrest of her son and the Assad regime's pursuit of her, she wrote multiple novels, short stories, and op-eds, articles for Al Jazeera, New Arab, and Al Mubashar, and various other sites as well. She's also written hundreds of radio show episodes. She's been broadcasted from Istanbul on Sawad Raya. She withdrew from the Arab Writers Union in 2011 in protest at its negative attitude towards peaceful demonstrations being constructed by the regime with live bullets. Ibtisam is an executive member of the Syrian Writers Association and an editorial board member of the association publishing the papers. I'll now hand you over to the wonderful Ibtisam. Thank you, Ibtisam.
Good evening, everyone. I will write from the Book of Shadow. It's my novel that was published in Egypt in 2020. It's in fact a change from the novels I wrote about the Syrian revolution. I wrote this novel in very difficult situation in Turkey. One of the Kuwaiti writers believed that it was therapeutic writing, and I will start reading. She said that the novelist, the writer, in fact, have managed to bring therapeutic elements to her novel. As Kafka said, it's a form of prayer. It's a victory amid a world that is characterized by the wilderness and the absence of the human being. It's a fascinating novel dominated by female characters, and it tackles questions that are related to the reality rather than focusing on the fiction. Each of the characters has its own story, and the overall structure of this novel is based on traditions and customs of the society. And through their stories, we understand the depth of the suffering they've been through. One of the characters, for example, is a very sensitive one, whereas Aris, who lives a life in solitude, she reflects deeply about all that is around her. The entire universe has become some place that is unbearable. However, we still have something that deserves living for, which is the children. The main character in this novel is Abdul Hayy. He's the hero who broke free from all the traditions of the society, and all of a sudden everything collapsed. I will start reading now an extract from my novel. It's a section entitled The Black Eye, العين السوداء.
It wasn't hard persuading Marwa to help Fitna escape, and together we made what we thought was a foolproof plan. I gave Marwa a drug to put in the cup of tea the guard always drank after dinner, and then she would steal the keys and accompany Fitna to the edge of the village where Abdul Hayy would be waiting in a taxi. But the plan failed because we hadn't realized there was a guard at the outskirts of the village. And Fitna was arrested before she could meet up with Abdul Hayy. Marwa ran away and came to me in a state of terror to tell me what had happened. She had to leave, fearing the head of the tribe would kill her. I went with her to where Abdul Hayy was waiting and told him what had happened. It was snowing heavily that night, and the wind whistled and whined. Trees crashed to the ground. I asked Abdul Hayy to leave the village with Marwa, but he refused. The driver wouldn't take any passengers. He said the wind was a promise in a snowstorm that would block the roads within an hour, and the car would get stuck and be unable to continue to Latakia. The route would be especially dangerous from Jisr al-Shuhur to Al-Najiyah. We returned to the village, and Marwa decided to risk staying with me. It was not yet morning when we heard that Sheikh Nawaf had called his nephew in Damascus and told him that Fitna was pregnant, that he was washing his hands of her and would leave her to him. The next night was harder on Abdul Hayy. He didn't sleep or rest, convinced he was soon to meet his death, and yet he refused to abandon Fitna. He couldn't run away and leave them to slaughter her and her unborn baby. He set out for Sheikh Nawaf's house. He sank to his knees before him and presented his dagger. If you won't let me marry your daughter, then kill me and let her go free. She is my lawful wife before God, and God will testify that we have not committed any sin. I ask you to swear by him that she will live, and so will my son, your grandson. Sheikh Nawaf didn't reply. His dignity had been injured, and he couldn't forgive his outsider for violating the sanctity of his household, kidnapping his daughter, and marrying her. He couldn't abide to have a grandson by a person with no pedigree, a mere shepherd who didn't know where he came from. But when he grasped the dagger, his hand trembled. Where did you come by this? He asked. It's my own dagger, Sheikh replied. Abd al-Hayy, my name's engraved upon it, and my history too, because it was handed down to me by my ancestors who came here from the Caucasus and yet never forgot their roots. My mother inherited it from her father, and before that her grandfather, and she put it in my bag along with a bundle of bread when she sent me out into the world before she was killed by a sniper's bullet during the war. The sheikh scrutinized him at length, considering his words, and his heart almost relented. His mind warned him against committing a crime like this. The man before him deserved to be respected, not killed, not because of his history, of his pedigree, but because of his courage and manliness. But at that moment, his nephew arrived. What are you waiting for, uncle? He screamed. Why haven't you killed him and washed away the shame? Matters were decided. The nephew snatched the dagger from his uncle's hand and plunged it into Abdalhay's heart. There was screaming all around. Next, he went to his cousin and stabbed her in the chest and neck, again and again with the same dagger. The women of the village came rushing at the sound of the screaming and crying, and they lifted Fitna up and carried her out of the house before the eyes of her father and cousin, who sat on the ground, sobbing at the crime he had committed. The women brought her quickly to me, hoping I would find some life left in her and manage to save her. They were right to do so because Fitna was fighting back against death. I had to stop the bleeding if she was to live, but it was going to be impossible. Which one of you is midwife? I shouted. A woman stepped forward. I am. I looked her in the eye and she understood what she had to do. Can't you save her? Asked Marwa. God alone can save her, I replied, but I can save her baby. I'd never had to perform a superhuman task like this before. It was the first time I'd held a scalpel, the first time I'd lifted a baby out of its mother's womb. The midwife held me. She washed the tiny baby girl, swaddled her in soaked muslin, and handed her to Marwa. Together, we stooped up Fitna's wound, washed her thin, frail body, and covered her in winding sheet. She had surrendered her spirit when we cut the umbilical cord that connected her to her daughter. I looked the midwife in the eye. I won't tell anyone, she said firmly. Don't worry. There is a kind gypsy woman who lives nearby. I'll give her to the child to breastfeed. She will take care of her and protect her, even if it means taking her away from here. She wrapped the baby in a woolen cloak and slipped out while the women were saying their final farewells to Fitna. Guard brought Abdul Hay's body and left it on the ground in front of the house. All of the women in the village were seated in my house. I washed and wrapped his body alone. None of the men dared to come and assist me, and the women were ashamed to see his naked body. I was alone with him in a tiny room, his body cold and his skin clear and pale, and his body hovering above the wooden table. My fingers trembled. By the time the hour was out, there wasn't a house left in the village with a sprig of herbs or a flowering plant, a cascade of roses, myrtle, sweet basil, violets, narcissus, spikenard, and rosemary, and buckets full of water. The women dug the grave and gently lowered the two lovers into it. They scattered roses over them along the soil and decorated the grave with myrtles and roses and pleated wreaths of violets and placed them on the gravestone where one of them had written, "Here lies love." Two lovers resting at last from the bitter noise of hate, Abdul Hayy and Fitna, whose life began on the night of February 14, 1975, on the third day of the funeral. That's it. Thank you very much. This is the part of the novel that I'm going to read. And once again, I will reiterate that this was a kind of a break from writing a series of novels that I have written about the Syrian revolution. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ibtisam. That was absolutely beautiful. Just having that romantic element that negotiates with struggles, pain, and the difficulties, but and demonstrates the resilience of the women, but in a very distinct way. And again, lots of questions and comments that we all have, but we've got our final speaker for this evening, poet, and then after that we will move on to discussion. So I would now like to introduce Amal Kassir, a Syrian American poet. So she's checked in all the way from America, born and raised in Denver, Colorado, to an Arab father and an American convert mother. She has performed and taught in 13 countries and cities all over, in venues ranging from orphanages to refugee camps to youth prisons to churches. She is a youth mentor, a writing teacher, and a traveling poet. She is also the Hello? Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay. So you did hear my introduction of Amal, yes? Oh, okay, fantastic. So she is a youth mentor, a writing teacher, and a traveling poet. She is also the program manager of the mental wellness program for Muslim youth for positive impact in Colorado. Thank you so much for being here, Amal. Over to you.
Thank you, Bahriya. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I'd like to first acknowledge the translators who delivered us the beautiful messages from the Arabic-speaking poets and writers. It really is a privilege for me as a young Syrian American to be in the presence of these pillars in both the literature and academic sense, but also just as Syrian women. My relationship with Syria, it comes from my father's side. I am half Syrian, but they say, you know, it's the better half. And my relationship through my writing has manifested in a very almost childish way, you know, collecting the things that I can remember. And I lived in this beautiful country and I spent time and witnessed the matriarch. I witnessed the women and the operation that was undergone beneath them and how the house and how the management was done under their oversight. So having this disconnection geographically has really just, it's always been a yearning. And what little I remember of my beautiful country, all is connected to the earth. And more specifically, Mother Earth. So let us talk of women. This first poem, it is a performance piece. So I'm going to perform it for you, and I hope you will enjoy. Bismillah. My grandmother always had dinner on the table. Even when the tyrant put checkpoints outside her door, her defiance made meal times a battle her family would always win. As long as she could keep chopping, she would get that tabbouleh to the table fresh, because families sit together to eat. They don't await Salat al-Janaza. So she would send my cousins down the stairs to get her parsley, and they ate like kings amidst a war zone. Recipes the tyrant has never tasted. My grandmother knows Syria better than anyone. It is the arthritis living in her knees. She had a farm whose dust she knew by name. She knew the day the peaches would be ripe, how sour a lemon was based on the rain. My grandmother spoke the language of the land that fed her. She housed families on her farm who would help till the soil, their hands colored with dirt, her hands bruised from hollowing out all that kusa. And they built Syria with a prayer, with a meal, blistered hands, and enough food to feed the neighbors. You see, the fallah, the farmer, is the one who knows their country best. It is always them to take the first bullets, and it is always them to stay behind. They know what Syria needs when she is thirsty, knows what she will do to his body when he is buried. A farmer knows what his grave will smell like. And when the war started, even the rivers ran away. For the hands of a militant are not like the hands of a farmer. Bullets and earth cannot speak to each other, and blood will never make crops grow. And so the country stopped growing. She spent her time counting casualties, and it's hard to trust the footsteps when everyone is running. When the bombs disguise themselves as clouds, when militants talk dirty about a country whose parsley they have never even tasted. Only a farmer will convince the soil to grow again. He is water in time of drought. His street dialect is the language that the dirt prays in. And when he cooks for all those hungry people, he is using my grandmother's recipes. The Assad regime cut down all of the trees in my grandmother's farm. They ripped the pomegranate from the earth, and the lemons don't grow there anymore. And the people wonder, do they not remember who fed them? Tete says she's going to write down every single recipe when this war is over, because she knows what her country needs. We know what our country needs. We will rebuild it with a prayer, with a meal, blistered hands, and enough food to feed each and every one of the neighbors. And the tyrants, the militants, the rapists, the terrorists, the warlords, well, just like the rest of us, they will also learn their graves. They will feel the weight of the entire country on their chests. And when the soil asks them, did you not spill blood in my name? Then why do you fear me so? Let the earth give your body back to me. And these men, they will not know how to respond. They do not speak the language of their country. They will struggle against the dirt that fed them. That's my first poem. Thank you very much. What a life that we have endured. And my family personally, we have lost 49 members beneath the bombs or behind the snipers or through starvation, one way or another, whether it was siege and not getting the one shot of insulin. And so we know the diversity of death. And when you, as a woman, when you witness the death of loved ones, you are carrying nations inside of your heart. The depth of the grief that I have witnessed in my aunts and my cousins and my family members, it is profound. And the woman navigates pain historically. Every month, whenever we have a child, whether it's the grief of our children or our loved ones, pain is a part of the language that we know. And so we have more experience in managing this, I think, than you see others being able to handle it. And this is profound. And I've had the privilege of being the daughter of a Syrian man who comes from a home that is run by the matriarch. And this is the side of me that has given me the depth of my heart, and surely the depth of my poetry. I have one short poem left, and I'll close it off there. And this one is an ode. It is an ode to the field nurses. I think things have gotten so messy, so tricky over the years, but in the beginning, there were women who gave their entire lives to be on the front lines, and still do to this day. This is called The Field Nurse. fluorescent flickers and running feet, like the August before the war. Now curfewed electricity and bloodstained tile. Her fingertips, once coated in chalk, dust concrete powder from children's hair. Her hands, once wrapped around rulers, wrap gauze around children's limbs. Once dotting the tha and the ta, she's now crossing T's and X's, stitching wounds shut with black thread, passing out towels like graded tests, collecting bandages with red ink. Students on top of desks instead of in them, pushed together for hospital beds. She instructs widows to steady their shaky needles, critiquing their sutures like cursive, hushing hysteric fathers like they are class clowns, sending mothers out of the room like they are distraction. Her classroom is an emergency room. She is a self-taught medic, certified by necessity. She keeps inventory on the back of her teaching license, left literature for medicine labels, pencils for scalpels, glue for thread, chalkboards for death certificates. Bombings sound the bell, and corpses wear name tags in a single file. A Syrian teacher's work never ends. Thank you very much.
Wow, amazing. Amal, that was absolutely stunning. Like all of our material that we've experienced and heard today, yet again, another fantastic one. And I think it's really important to flag up that we have every generation, so many like we have, you're one of our youngest poets amongst us, and we have our oldest professor poet with us. And with every generation, we have felt Amal, we have felt hope. And I'd like to thank you for closing with the really hopeful poem and poetry, and now open the floor for discussion, because I know everybody has got lots of questions and comments that they'd like to share. So what I'm going to join the women now to have a brief discussion, and then we'll move on to your questions. So please do, now that you have experienced all of the wonderful, amazing voices of the evening, post your questions into the chat box, and Maggie, Dr. Maggie Grant is working through them, and then we will also include them into our session. So thank you all to all of you women for being here, for accepting the invitation, for joining me on this platform for us to share our narratives of Syria. And what I noticed through all of your narratives, and also through thinking about your bios and your lived experiences, was that dynamics between what is happening in Syria and how it has impacted your literature and your art. So how what you were writing prior to revolution, what you ended up writing during revolution, what you ended up writing as a result of the war. And this also gave way for a kind of shape shifting in terms of your form. You became quite playful, where some of you negotiated with the short story, and then it shifted to the novel, or you did the play, or a mixture of both. Music figured in, or film figured in. So this hybridity and experimentation with your narratives came about, is what I noticed. But of course, this is just through my reading. And my question to you is, can you each share what happened to your narrative? What happened to your writing and your literature as a result of what happened to the space around you? And that space, of course, is your Syria, but it also, as Fozya said, the role of the kitchen in relation to her writing. We also had Jihan talking about the power of literature and arts in her healing, in her curing, in her responding. So over to you. If we can, maybe we need to say who will speak because it would be lovely for each of you to respond to this question. I will pass over to Samir, and then Samir, if you can pass over to the next person, and then the next person to the next person to answer this question, that would be absolutely fabulous. So over to you, Samar.
بهذه الطريقة تفضلي.
بدي أتشكر الصبايا.
I'd like to thank the ladies for sharing their stories, the stories that I managed to listen to. And I'd like to point to a very important point. When the revolution started, I was already an author, a published author who has published 15 years even before the revolution. I've already worked in the TV, working in journalism. I've published short stories, novels. Before the revolution, the majority of my novels were focused on the militarization. The militarization of the situation in Syria, how the military made an attempt to steal the wealth of the country, the military or the army that turned Syria into a farm for the Assad family, the army that provoked violations, violence, who provoked hidden violence from the community. When the Syrian or when the Arab Spring sparkled in Tunisia with Bouazizi himself, a group of the Syrian intellectuals, writers, and authors, we started to reflect on this and to ask or to consider what are the implications on the situation in Syria. We've already we had already been discussing the situation in Syria, and we were talking about the division within the army, how we were discussing what happened during the reform movement that Hafiz al-Assad claimed to have conducted back in the 70s, and after that the situation in Hama in the 80s. So we were discussing this entire historical context, and then we were waiting for what's going to happen 2011. And here it's important really to note that when the Arab Spring sparkled, the women met, the Syrian women met. They decided to arrange organizations, to organize demonstrations. It was back then in Damascus. And we, the women, used to take part in these demonstrations. And at the time, I was covering these demonstrations without the tiniest fear inside me. And maybe if I'm reflecting about that period now, perhaps I can say that I was a bit reckless, but at the time I did not feel that. I was focused on how snipers were targeting demonstrators, peaceful demonstrators. Then I was threatened. I was asked to report back to the intelligence branches, and I was threatened many times, and I had to leave Syria a couple of months after that. But at the very beginning, I was there in the streets with other women participating in demonstrations, and it is unfair to say that women were only working at home or caring for their children or cooking for their husbands. That is unfair and unjust. We have many examples of women who were taking the lead in organizing demonstrations, in advocating for these demonstrations and asking people to join. I won't be talking for too long. I'll move to talk about when I returned back to Syria to Idlib.
بين حقيقة الشعب السوري، الناس المحليين، الناس
And here I will talk about how there has been a gap between what's represented about this region and the actual population who lives in it. I was living there in the villages and the suburbs of the city of Idlib, and I was staying with a group of women, organizing with them, discussing with them, consulting with them, and they are the ones who were protecting me and enabling me to hide when I wanted to hide, because I was going to the front lines in order to cover what was happening. These women played a very important and vital role in building the pillars that enabled a civil movement. Here I'm talking about 2011. These are the early stages of the conflict. What I'm trying to say, listening to all of you, first of all, I admire your courage. I admire how you are sharing these stories that have personal links, whether it's about crimes, the so-called crimes of honor, or talking about your personal experience. What I'm trying to say is we do have to talk about our suffering. We do have to confront the attacks on us, whether it is by the regime, the fascist regime, or by the radical groups, whether they are local or foreigners, or by the society, the conservative society that frames women within certain limitations, or the individuals who consider women to be something prohibited, or something that is a taboo, something that should not be seen. We need to understand, however, something. The willing of God by itself won't prevent violators or attackers from attacking women. That is something we need to be aware of and to take an action in order to combat. We as women, when we work together, and this is something that I will expand on in a minute. When we work together, for example, on the project of documenting oral history, or through novels even, we as women, we have, and this is based on my experience, especially on documentation, an experience that is now that I have compiled throughout the past 10 years, and I have met thousands of women. I assure you that the Syrian women are the ones who are able to convey an accurate documentation of all of the details of the complex context in Syria. And this documentation incriminates all parties to the conflict. Though I don't really agree with this last part, because when we say all parties to the conflict, we are putting all parties to the conflict in equal position, though I believe that the Syrian regime is the one responsible for the majority of the violations. Please, those who have their mics open, would you please keep them muted except for the main speaker? We as Syrians, as women, Syrian women in diaspora, each of us has her own situation and on condition, and what we are working on now, whether it's poetry, documentation, novels, analysis, regardless of the short-term impact, definitely we will have a huge impact at a later stage. What Fozia is going through now on her personal life, whether in public engagement, her ability to confront the society, it is part of a collective consciousness of the community, collective memory. What Ibtisam wrote about the so-called crimes of honor is also important, because women are raped and then they are killed because they got raped. Till now, we are still in this vicious circle. We need to be able to break free from this, and we have not to be able not to repeat the same mistakes of the previous of our ancestors. I'm really glad that I've met you, all of you. Some of you I've not met before or worked before, and I appreciate that we come from different backgrounds, but at the end we are Syrians, and together we are representative of the Syrian identity that we have been hoping to establish since the independence. It has been nearly 70 years, and Syria, unless for the Assad dynasty, would have played an important role and became perhaps the most prominent and important country in the region. So this connection between the Syrians in diaspora and the Syrians inside Syria is important. The Syrian women abroad or in diaspora perhaps are focused more on the conflicting identities inside Syria. However, the Syrians inside Syria are living under the occupation by different parties and different de facto powers. So what we need to do is to start bridging and to build connections and links between us women inside Syria and outside Syria in order to build on those in the future, because Assad, no matter how long it will take, will never remain in Syria, because this is an essential condition for all of us to return back to our home country. But we need to start from now to listen to one another and to start collaborating with each other and to have complementary role and not to be competing against one another. The war, of course, triggered this violence, and this violence has been also transformed and it has reached Syrians abroad. So I believe such format and such meetings and discussions are definitely an important opportunity for us to discuss and to start building these links, because otherwise we will never be able to accept one another. As long as our shared objective is to build a Syria that is based on a constitution that protects Syrian women. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you so much, Bahriya. Thank you for the interpreters. Thank you for all the ladies who attended with us today and who provided us with readings from their amazing works. Look forward to read the entire works that you've read extracts from today.
Thank you so much, Samir. We also have so many outstanding, excellent questions that keep coming in. So I'm really excited to share with the group. Everyone is really, has just been really moved by all of your narratives. Jihan, would you like to come in and share your comments about the question regarding how what is happening in Syria has impacted your writing, your literature? How have you changed form from prose to novel, to how has it affected your writing?
Thank you so much, Bahriya. I'm one of those writers, not only women, but all writers in general in Syria have affected by the Syrian Revolution, because the Syrian Revolution, in fact, have affected all aspects of our lives. First of all, when it comes to my perspective, my style, and the genre that I'm focused on. Regarding the content or the themes that I write about, for example, some new themes have emerged in our lives that definitely will be reflected in our writings. Prison literature, for example, this is something that was not as common as it is now. Previously, prison literature was limited to those who are in prison, and rarely we have leaked novels or leaked literary productions coming to us. At the same time, some of the social topics that were very common previously were no longer present, because we have new themes and new interests emerging among the society. The death, for example, is one of the major concerns for Syrians. Displacement, refugee, asylums, and so this is for my first point. The second aspect of a change, and I believe it's not something limited to me, it's the perspective or the understanding. We all have shifting understandings of many issues. Let me give you an example. Death. Women. Women are no longer this feminine character presented as a weak family member, or someone who's imprisoned within her society. Now, women are in fact leading characters. They are mothers, wives, sisters, women active in public life, women taking part in the revolution, women emerging as independent characters and taking part in different fields. Death is no longer about suffering. Death became, even in my own short stories, death became something that we mock, something we write sarcastically about. We talk about how a young man working in a refugee camp is suffering from all the nagging around him. And this person started to dream about the minute that he'll die, in order to have a moment of peace in his grave. And what's sarcastic about this story that I wrote is that this person, when he died, he was in fact executed, and he was put in a mass grave. So there are other topics or other themes that we started tackling differently. If you conduct or in fact, I have conducted a review of women literature produced during the first 5 years of the revolution, and I was focused on the color codes. For example, the color green, it's used to refer to the meadows, to something fresh, and now it's a reference. It became a reference to the prison walls, because they are affected by the humidity. The color red, it's no longer a reference to flowers or to roses. It's a reference to the blood and the bloodshed. Also, another aspect of the change is style itself. The traditional styles are no longer, at least they are no longer exclusive, maybe they are still used. I think the Syrian novel, till now, still has not developed fully. We are still at the level of documenting. We are documenting our own narration of what's happening through novels. We're documenting our own narrative of the current situation. And I think there are a few exceptions, including Ms. Ibtisam, because I've read and examined very closely her literary productions. And let me say, I believe this is something natural because proper literature cannot be developed on the spot. Usually, the most effective literature about a conflict, a context of conflict, is when the writer takes a step away from that context. When it comes to poetry, we will notice that there is an emergence in patriotic expression. And however, it's no longer about the geography itself, but it's about the concept or the perception of the home country. We have also a reference to a third type of country or home, which is where the Syrians have been resettled. And here there are plenty of contradictions and internal conflicts because some of the writers are located in a different country. It's becoming their home, but they are not happy with that, or at least they are not sure that this is what they want. The Syrian Revolution has been a turning point to entire Syrian literature. I'd like to comment on what Jihan said. Please go ahead. I don't agree with you that before the revolution we didn't have. Please, one at a time. One of the misconceptions about the Syrian literature before the revolution is that we did not have a prison literature in Syria before the revolution. This is of course wrong because we have the shell al-Qawqa'a. It was published years before the revolution and it talks in details about what was happening in Tazmor Balimera prison. We have also other productions by, or one of the problems when it comes to the Syrian narrative during the revolution is that there is a complete absence of a struggle for a cause before the revolution. Perhaps this is what's missing. If you go back to the history of the Syrians back in...
Can you hear me now?
سامعينك تفضلي. What happened is that there were certain red lines that the Syrians were not allowed to overstep because otherwise would be detained because of that. We know that there are many writers who are still inside Syria who live in regime-controlled areas and they have to abide by these red lines because otherwise they will be at risk. I'm not sure if you have read their work, but I can give you many examples. Azzam and Khalifa, and they are still till now, and they are still producing literature till now. So the Syrian have always been active, and the Syrian writers have been active. However, the problem was in the in how the extent of the censorship over their production. Let me give you an example of a detainee who spent the majority of his life in prison, and I believe this production, Al-Qawqa'a, the shell, is one of the most prominent literary works in this genre. Also, let me give you another example about Abdul Akram Saqqa, who's a religious forward thinking figure. However, what he wrote about and what his followers or those who influenced by him wrote about were not published widely because of how Assad regime, whether Hafiz al-Assad or later Bashar al-Assad, contained it. This group was descended twice by Assad regime and later by by Hafiz al-Assad and later by Bashar al-Assad. However, this group managed to continue this movement, and this is only an example. There are others, but they are very few in numbers, those who are still taking a side of the regime. What I'm trying to stress here is, even before the revolution, there was this movement, there was this type of production, but it is not as prominent or as visible because the extent of containment by the Syrian regime, because of the extent of suppression practiced by Assad regime. It's similar to when you talk about the Syrian feminist movement. I've met women who are 80 years old from Hama governorates, included Hazami Zuhur al-Adi, who was a witness to the events of Hama in the 80s. She witnessed all of these atrocities. She's aware of what happened, but she was not able to talk about this previously. But she talked about it, she wrote about it. Literature was there, it's already there. And we have this and here the example I gave you about the author of Al-Qawqa is still inside Syria. He's not involved in politics. He wrote it. His name is Mustafa Khalifa. He published it, and he's still inside Syria till now. He's a very courageous person. I know this novel, of course, and I have conducted a study about prison literature in Syria. Maybe you were not listening to me when I was presenting. My father was arrested in Balimera prison, and I was also a media worker and was responsible for covering the literature in general. Maybe there was some miscommunication between us. I was talking in general. I was talking about the mainstream. I was not talking about specific productions. What you gave me is one example, and it's the only exception, I think. Yes, the shell, Al-Qawqa, is a very interesting example. However, there are no other literary productions that were similar to that. Maybe you are not listening to me. My father was one of those who were imprisoned in Tadmor in Balimera, and he, even after he was released, he had to report back to the intelligence apparatus every month. We were unable to travel outside Syria. Not only him, it applied to the entire family. And Ms. Ibtisam is here with us, and she can explain how the writers in Syria used to manipulate the situation and to maneuver around it and to refer back to history and to find an event that is parallel to the current situation and talk about that historical event instead of talking about the current reality. Sorry, two people are we're talking at the same time. Jihan, I'm talking about the militarization and the sectarian tension. Sorry, two people are talking over each other. I cannot interpret.
نعم الوقت في خلفية اجتماعية
there was certain
وهدول كتير كتير كانوا قلال يعني نحن كنا بنتعلم للحكي
social connections and social support that only a limited group of Syrians enjoyed. It was a privilege, not available for everyone. And the writers from these groups that were socially strong and resourceful managed to write and to publish, because otherwise they will be at risk. However, for the rest, the situation was not as such. The rest had always to project their ideas on events from back in the history in order to criticize the practice that I'd like to criticize. I agree with you, of course. Syria itself was a very large prison where all Syrians were there, including the writers. But I'm disagreeing with you when you said that writers did not make an attempt. I did not say that. Said they were not given the chance, they were not given the opportunity to try and to do that. I'm not sure how you got that from what I said, but I never said that the intellectual elite in Syria betrayed the revolution. No, I never said that. I said that the intellectuals have a responsibility more than others, and they have said the words and they expressed their opinion.
Can I come in?
هل تسمحون لي أن أعلق هنا؟
I think I'm absolutely fascinated by this seriously enriching discussion between you guys in terms of giving us a foundation, because you know I'm from the UK. I teach in the UK. I teach literatures at the University of Kent, and this is one thing that I've been talking about with Rida, with Fozya. We're currently working on planning for an anthology, and these questions are so important to us here, to the English-speaking community, because we're not familiar with the literatures of Syria, and we really want to learn about the literatures of Syria. And just through your discussion, and your it's not even a debate, it's a discussion. It's a wonderful discussion where I'm learning and seeing how enriched the literatures are, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I thank you both so much, and I think there's definitely room for us to open this up. And like I said, we are planning an anthology, and I think we actually need to re-meet and have a working group to open up this anthology amongst this group, because there's so much to unpack. I think what would be a good idea, because what we have are so many questions that have come in, and maybe if it's okay with all of you, we'll move on. I'll hand you over to Maggie to ask a couple of the questions, but what I want to do is put a kind of peg onto this discussion that you've just been having about the literatures of Syria before the revolution and after the revolution, because as literary scholars, as a literary scholar who's really interested in world literature and particularly the literatures of Syria, I want to learn and know more about this. So it's just absolutely fantastic. And I'm so excited to bring the conversation to whole new levels. Thank you so much for what you have taught us here. Maggie, do you want to?
Thanks, Bahria. Yeah, just what a fabulously rich discussion, and thank you to everyone that's been posting questions in the chat. And just to echo Amal, thank you so much to our interpreters who've not only been interpreting the conversation but also all of the questions that have been coming through the chat. So I'm going to start with one, and Fozya, I think I'll direct this one to you first of all, if you're still here. So this question came through in the chat: how can we shift the narratives that are reflected in the attitudes of the humanitarian actors towards refugee women as vulnerable and in need of empowerment and liberation? So a big question. Thank you.
نعم أكيد يعني
Of course, no doubt.
التجربة اللي كانت في
My
تركيا
first
هي
attempt
العمل مع
was
منظمة
working in Turkey with
وهي يعني
Bada'il
منظمة
Alternatives
تعمل في
organization.
التاريخ الشفوي.
It's an organization
كنا
that
يعني
works on
مقابلات مع
providing
نساء
documenting
سوريات
oral history. We conducted interviews with Syrian women. We asked them a couple of questions about their lives and how that has changed when they moved to diaspora or to refugee countries. This work specifically, it gave me so many ideas about how to tackle this specifically, but I've not managed to convey it all. I try to do that through in my literary work, but I believe other tools, other supportive tools are also needed in order to make this shift. In some of my work, I try to avoid writing a storyline or to convey a personal experience as it is. Because and when I started this style, it was in order to avoid the criticism that says that all women write from personal experience and about personal experience only. However, now I've realized that whether it's based on personal experience or not, it's still realistic literature and it's authentic. These experiences are well worthy of being documented, of being written and conveyed as they are.
Thank you, Fozya. That's such a great response, and I suppose it makes me think about all of the other roles that the women that we've heard from tonight hold, not just in relation to creative writing, but journalism, activism, academia, and oral history. I think is a really, really powerful tool so it's great to hear about the work you've been doing in that area. Amal, if it's okay, I'm going to direct the same question to you. So I'm just going to repeat the question. It was about how we can shift the narratives that are reflected in the attitudes of humanitarian actors towards refugee women as vulnerable and in need of empowerment and liberation. Thanks, Amal.
Definitely. And I think I would ultimately be echoing what Fozya said, but an academic in trauma literature once said that the greatest difference between a victim and a survivor is the story that they choose to tell. And so really what it comes down to is just surfacing the voices of the people as they exist, because when you get to know the people, when you actually engage with them and listen to them, it is not typically a narrative of vulnerability. Certainly, there is a need that the society owes these women in the sense that they must take care of them collectively. They are owed that basic extent. But these are survivors. These are powerful individuals. And choosing not to be broken is something that we see so often. I mean, that is what gets the refugee from their country to wherever they are seeking refuge. So uplifting, listening, and really utilizing storytelling to elevate the voices of these women in multiple facets, and honoring the pain as well. Not excluding the pain from the story of resilience and power, but honoring that pain and bringing it forward so that, when we do see, we're not seeing, vulnerability and these people in need of saving. These people can save us. These people have saved me. Their stories have allowed us to realize that you can crawl out of absolute darkness in an effort for a better life. So really, once again, just ensuring that we honor the voices of these individuals, and that there are great examples of art therapists and storytellers who go into refugee camps, for example, or go to the border. I know Al Jazeera has done a couple of stories about them, but just continuing collectively to uplift those stories and demanding that they be heard, even if that means shaking the cage a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. I think that's such a great response, and that word multifaceted, I think, has been summed up by everyone we've heard speak tonight. You know, all of these stories have brought such complexity and such kind of profound ideas out through their writing. Just one more question. We do have a lot, but we've just selected a couple to go through just now. I think, Ibtisam, if it's okay, I'll come to you with this one, which is, what is your message to Syrian girls who have been displaced or who are refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria? And how would you like to be remembered by these young generations for the next 50 years? And the person who posted this question also wanted us to thank all of the speakers so much for their very inspiring poems and readings, and wish power, respect, and solidarity to all of our speakers. Thanks, Ibtisam.
Thank you for the question. Actually, the message of what I write and what other Syrian writers write includes, in a way or another, these tiny details of the lives of those people who were forcibly displaced from their country. And I'm one of those people. I also have two daughters who were forcibly displaced from Syria, and we all suffered from the harsh conditions, not finding a job and not finding ways to live. So it's not a message maybe, but rather an moral support through writing and in words. My younger daughter is a formative artist, and she wrote her first novel in English and is going to be published soon. The other daughter faced plenty of problems, and she remained jobless for a long time, but she challenged, she defeated all of these challenges, and now she is doing journalistic work, although she graduated from civil engineering department. It's not only the challenge of women, it's also the challenge of men as well. My son was detained, and hadn't it been for the writing from within the detention, he wouldn't have been able to continue his life. So I believe these words have great importance, and they provide support for the young people to face the challenges that we have faced. These harsh conditions that we have lived in the countries of asylum. I don't like to send messages or advice. I just want to be on the side of those people and support them, just as we supported them in 2012 after the detention of my son, to look for him in all of the security apparatuses, especially that he was working in providing relief. And I worked with the girls from all the components of the Syrian society. They were meeting in places and delivering medicine and aid for those who were hard displaced and for the besieged cities like Al-Homs at the time. So what I did is that I continued the work that my son used to be doing before his detention, and that gave me the strength to bear the long periods of his detention, which were more than 2 years. And I didn't know for a long time, I didn't know whether he is dead or alive, because it is known in Syria that those who are detained, they may never come out alive. So do you know that the women who participated in the demonstrations and all of these activities were the ones who supported me and the ones who helped me to be resilient and steadfast? Syrian young women don't need anybody to send messages to them, because they know from day one when they took to the streets in a protest that calling for freedom, they know what they want and they know how to face all the difficulties that they face in countries of asylum or in their displacement places, whether they were forcibly displaced or a migration journey to the West. I believe the young women are the ones who can teach us lessons, and it's not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibtisam. That's a great response. And I love when an answer turns the question back on itself. I think it's a really good way to look at this. So yeah, thank you for your response there. And I suppose it leads us into thinking about the role of writing in different contexts. So Fatima, I think I'll pass this next question to you, which picks up on some of the things that Ibtisam was speaking about just there. So the question is, to what extent has writing your beautiful stories, poetry and other literary forms helped you as Syrian women to deal with the trauma of your experiences of the conflict in your beautiful country?
ما عم نقدر نسمعك. يا ريت تفتحي المايك.
ممكن إعادة السؤال؟
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So the question
بالتأكيد السؤال هو يقول لأي حد أو لأي مدى لأي حد كتابة هذه
helped you as Syrian women to deal with the trauma of your experiences of the conflict in your beautiful country?
ما عم نقدر نسمعك دكتورة. المايك عندك مسكر، يا ريت تفتحي الميكروفون لنقدر نسمعك. ما عم نقدر نسمعك. ما عم نقدر نسمعك دكتورة فاطمة، يا ريت تفتحي الميكروفون.
You're muted.
ست فاطمة فاطمة ما عم نسمع صوتك. عاملة ميوت.
محكوا معها بالعربي.
شكلها ما سمعت.
ست نوال. هي بتحكي انجليزي بطلاقه، هي اصلا استاذه يعني كانت في كليه الادب الانجليزي في حلب، مدرسه في استراليا بس الصوت عندك ما بيوصل.
الميكروفون عندك انا ما عم بسمعها ابدا للست فاطمه.
ايه ما حاطه ميوت الظاهر.
وانا ميوت عندي.
Okay, she's unmuted. Okay.
ما بعرف اذا حط ميوت ولا انميوت.
هلا عم نسمعك.
هل تسمعني الان؟
Do you hear us? Do you hear? Please, someone tell her that you hear her, please.
نعم مسموع دكتورة نوال، تفضلي.
Yes.
استاذتي عم نسمعك، تمام نسمعك كويس. تفضلي.
دكتورة نوال حضرتك حاطة ميوت، ما عم نسمعك.
هلا عم تسمعوني؟
ايه هلا تمام.
طيب.
Okay.
عشت في حلب ككل سكان اللي عاشوا
I lived in Aleppo just like all other people who suffered from fear and the bombardment. All of Aleppo was under bombardment from east to west. So we were afraid to go out of our homes, and when we leave homes, we don't know whether we will go back alive or not. I tried to get out of this round, and I always looked at things in a comprehensive vision. In one of my stories, one of the characters tells another man to look thoroughly about all the points, about incidents around them. This kind of vision will assist people to get out of these crises. So I always believe in believing in hope. Our prophet talked about the harsh times that will hit the Levant, that will happen, that will take several years. So our only solution is to seek refuge by God. When we are afraid of death, the only escape, the only exit from this fear is holding to belief and faith in God. So I always live in my mind better circumstances, better conditions, despite the bad conditions that I am living here. I live in this romantic or imaginary world that I have in my mind, which helps me overcome the bad reality that I'm living in.
أي سؤال آخر تاني؟
اتفضلي احكي، عم نسمعك ورح يترجموا.
Is there any other question?
Can I share something?
Go ahead.
Yes, of course, Rita. Rita, go.
Thank you,
I'm
Fatima.
gonna speak about this very question because I shared Dr. Nawal. Yes.
One of my stories, an alien lived in Syria during the incidents, and another story that takes place in the isthmus. Another character speaks about the strange stories that she went through when she was alive before she goes to the hereafter. So these are the kind of stories that I live in. Is there any other question?
Thank you, Fatima. That was a great response, and I think that advice to look carefully. I suppose it's on those of us that are hearing the stories to listen carefully. Rita, do you want to come in?
I want to comment because we went through that. I remember I used to do once was at Aleppo University. What I used to do, drive and go to Nawal Bazerbashi's house, and we would share like some of the stories. She would do me a cup of milk and coffee, the one that I like, and then she would play Oud for me, and she would say, "Crazy girl, explosion, I'm afraid outside, I come to you where I get courage." So her stories, experimental stories, and the coffee would do such a great thing. I remember one day there was a big explosion. All I did is I drove my car to her house. Everything was destroyed next to her. I didn't mind. I didn't tell anybody. And I was there, and I stayed there for 4 or 5 hours and then drove back.
Rita, thank you for sharing that. That gives us a real insight into the these relationships, not just in this room today, but many chapters before then. I'm just going to check: is Hiba still with us? I know she was having some technical problems. No, okay. Bahria, I think I'll hand back to you. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for such thoughtful responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much. It's just been amazing evening and experience. I'd like to first and foremost thank each and every one of the women who accepted Cara's invitation to be here on this platform today with us to speak about Syria, for Syria, and a lot of the narratives and a lot of the discussions that we have had today, but also in all of your works that I've read, there is consistently this force towards capturing truth, the truth of what is happening. I see it in a lot of Samar Yazbek's work, from The Crossing, A Woman in a Crossfire, to The Planet of Clay, where it's about capturing truth. And my understanding of this through your narratives, with your narratives, through spending time with each and every one of you, through reading, living and experiencing your work, is that to capture that truth is about capturing the lived experiences of your own families, of yourselves and of your country. The lived experiences in terms of that which is a palpable, concrete reality. It's not an abstraction. And that is what I have noticed in each and every one of your narratives, a truth that has moved me in so many ways and moved us in so many ways tonight. And I would like to thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to have shared a platform with you. And I'm really thankful to the wonderful Maggie Grant for working with me through preparing this. And of course, the force they call Rida Anis, who is in Turkey and connected me with so many of the amazing writers who I would have struggled, I wouldn't have been able to connect with. And of course, Rida is also writing about many of the writers here today. So she's writing about Amal, Fozya and Rida are writing about Ibtisam. Samir Yazbek is also a core figure. Hiba is writing about. So we are both engaging with you through scholarship, which is somewhat abstract, but also concretely as well. And we hope that through our narratives, we will actively and concretely make sure that we are capturing and telling the truth of what is happening in Syria, which means capturing the lived experiences of what is happening in Syria, which can give way for us to move beyond whatever dominant narratives are being discussed and to create an alternative Syria through your narratives, the Syria that you women, you amazing women want. I would also like to say that we're currently together with Rida working and Fozya working on an anthology that will be focused on women writing Syria. And this discussion that we have initiated here will be unpacked further, and hopefully all of the women that are here with you today, along with many other women, will be part of that anthology. Rida, is there a closing statement you would like to make?
Thank you so much, Bahria, for making this possible. I'm so happy, like having this bunch of writers here and there. Amal, I discovered you reading about you last year. So I said, yay, because my PhD dissertation was about American women playwright or writers, but from multi-ethnic backgrounds. I didn't find Syrian ones. So 2 years ago, I found one. Last year, I found you. So I was very happy. I'm thrilled to have like different generations today. So that would contribute a lot to the anthology. And we would like to capture these voices in one book and introduce it to the world. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for making this possible. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, our dear writers, all of you. I mean, what is outstanding? Different generations, but very deep insight. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And of course, we'd also like to thank Cara for providing this platform where all of us can not just speak, but can loudly share our vision and version and our amals for the future. So our hopes for the future of Syria. Thanks a lot, guys. And this recording will be posted onto Cara's website. This will be recorded and posted onto Cara's website. And also we do have a range of questions that have come in, and some of the women haven't been able to answer those questions. So we will possibly gather the questions, reach out to the women who hopefully will be able to respond to those questions. Maggie and I and Rida will prepare a nice documentation that brings together these voices on the website. But watch this space, because this isn't us. This isn't just a one event and then that's it. These voices are going to carry on. And thank you so much for joining us and being here this evening. So have a nice evening.